Greetings, podcast listeners. Last Sunday, Tony and Billy, that's me, and Robin Irisari led a nature bike tour as part of the Bikesploration series, which is a partnership of Spoke Magazine, a local Philadelphia cycling and other forms of transportation magazine, and Hidden City. We led a bike tour of the Tacony Creek Park, starting at the Olney Playground, at the edge of North Philly and Northeast Philly, for those who are looking on their maps. And then we rode through the Tacony Creek Park, stopping to look at some neat stuff and tell people about it. And then emerging from the creek into what you might call the row house and then industrial cityscape of, again, this area that's sort of on the border between Northeast Philly and North Philly, and then stopping at a few stops on our way to the Delaware River, where we round up the tour at an osprey nest at General Pulaski Park. We didn't get to do a good job recording the introduction of the ride, funny enough. Also was pretty windy, so Robin kicked it off with talking about the landscape, talking about how, we have sort of this surrounding cityscape of streets and concrete and row houses, and stores and old factories and whatnot. And then in the middle, you have this wooded corridor. And so you can go sort of from that wooded corridor where you can't really tell you're in a city and pop right out and you're back in the city. I also talked about what I think of as one of the themes of the ride, which is that the entire area we were looking at is industrial or post-industrial landscape. Even the creek, which, is forest today with a nice creek running through it, all was logged probably several times in the past, and had a series of mills on it back before we had other ways of powering industry. So even if it all looks pretty natural today, in one section it looks very artificial, in another, all of it you could count as some degree of post-industrial. Robin also gave an introduction to the Tacony Frankfurt Watershed Partnership, which is the organization he works for, and that works to protect this watershed and educate people about it. This is what Robin does for a living, actually. He is the outreach coordinator for Philadelphia for the watershed. And so the three of us led the ride, especially in the early parts. Tony agreed to watch the bicycles when we walked away from them. So you'll hear more of me and Robin talking. And with that, we'll kick into it. You're also going to hear the voice of Elliot, who is one of the younger riders, but a highly skilled birder, pointing out some birds along the way. And we hope you enjoy. And if you have any interest in the TTF, the Tacony Frankfurt Watershed Partnership, you'll see a link on our website to them. And also we'll be tweeting out some pictures that Robin took while we were on the ride. And of course, if you do enjoy it, please go to your favorite podcasting platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and please rate us and leave some comments. That'll help other people find us and check out how awesome we are. Also, feel free to follow us on Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast. Drop us an email to let us know how we're doing at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. And if you see something cool where you are, please record a little note about it on your phone, and then you can then send us the file. We'd be happy to put it on as some wildlife bling. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 267-603-3219. Again, 267-603-3219. Thanks. So I'll start off talking. We were Tony and I were interviewing, or Tony was interviewing the head of the American Birding Association, ABA. We were talking about birds that people happen to see, and he used an expression that we have since adopted because we love it, called the unholy trio. So if you're a birder, could you guess what the unholy trio would be? All right.
European starling.
Yep.
And
There you go. Nailed it. All right.
What was the third one?
Pigeon, rock dove.
Oh, okay.
So they're all three of them are not native, and I might stop and talk about starlings when we see them maybe. But house sparrows, we got tons of them around us right now, and so these all have interesting stories, I think. House sparrows, they start their association with humans, like maybe 7,000 years ago or so. I mean, they started off as a Eurasian species, but the the ones that are linked to us started off sort of piggybacking with people when we started farming. So about as far back as there's been agriculture, there have been house sparrows eating sort of the spilled grains and hitting our fields and stuff. And they've recently been able to tell, I guess, that the ones that, like these right here, the ones that live around cities and around farms and everything, around people, sort of are a separate set from a wild type house sparrow that still lives around the Middle East and sort of around the Middle East, Mediterranean. So these birds have been with us a very long time. It's hard to say when they left. It's hard to call them wild anywhere, except for that one little remnant population that still sort of lives in the pre-human associated way. And they made it to the States very intentionally in the 1800s as people were starting to plant trees like street trees, basically. And so as people started intentionally planting trees in urban spaces, they were hit by various tree pests, so bugs, basically. And so the sparrows were a solution to that. They were released to try to eat bugs. Initially, I was thinking, how would that work? Because they mostly eat seeds, but they feed their babies a lot of bugs. And so it was like thousands of them were released to Philadelphia to try to control bugs.
The unholy trio!
And the creek that we're going to be riding along, the Tacony Creek, was the divider between old Oxford and Bristol townships. So before the consolidation of Philadelphia, these were two separate townships. There was a big mill town right down here called Crescent Mill. There's a historic bridge right now under historic restoration at the time, which is why we didn't start further up today. It's a 3-arch stone bridge that will be going past. This was the Crescent Mill. This monument is a Civil War monument in honor of the folks who volunteered from this town. So this is the Grubtown Monument, a little known piece of local history. What we're going to see when we go through is going to be the Tacony Creek. We're going to get up to Rising Sun Ave Bridge, which is the location with the most beaver activity.
Right.
In all the creek down here.
We will stop and look at a chewed beaver stump.
We'll check that stuff out.
Talk about beavers.
Let's talk some beavers.
They're working their way up the Tacony. Now they're into Cheltenham, you were saying?
They're into Cheltenham. So yeah, I was kind of curious whether they're coming from headwaters too, from like up in the Pennypack or something. So
I don't think
like
so. They're coming up, yeah. So again, they would have been, historically, like nearly wiped out in our area of the country just by fur trapping. And then so I was looking at some Fairmount Park records that were saying, as of actually when they were surveying in the 90s, they weren't recording them here. The guy at the water department I talked to who had done the tree plantings was saying he grew up in the area and he would have seen them if they were here because he was a kid fishing in the creek and everything and doing everything. So they seem like they're relatively recent. It's a fun topic, I think, because it makes for complicated land management. You might want to plant, like they did, invest a lot of money in a whole bunch of nice oak trees to plant to reforest sections of a park with native species, right? But then you have a native species, the beavers, who have moved in and decide, no, those look like yummy oak trees, thank you very much, we'll take them. And it sort of gets in the way of your reforestation, your greening effort, and however much budget and time and effort as an agency you put into trying to do this plan for the animals, and they had the ingratitude to eat all the trees. So it makes for, and they can also be a challenging species to manage in a landscape in general. In a way, they're rivals to, they have their own landscape management ideas. There are problems in other cities, not here, but where beavers will try to block culverts, or you could imagine one of them at some point deciding that the stormwater outflows, which we'll see a little bit, are too much running water, that has to stop, we're going to take some logs and dam it up. And so they'll dam up smaller streams and to build ponds, which in sort of a landscape that we're not managing is sort of a great natural function. It helps keep sort of the landscape, the habitat sort of turning over. Like you can go from forest to pond to then marsh, and then you have succession of trees and stuff coming in, which is something that a lot of species around PA depend on.
But it doesn't work very well in a city, where we're sort of stuck to our sort of static land uses in a way. So they're a fun species that way. So I wanted to stop and point it out. And someone was asking, do they build lodges? And so in larger waterways, what they tend to do is burrow into the bank. So you won't see like a beaver lodge like you would out in the on a smaller stream with like the entrance underwater and all that kind of thing. So you will though, and they're shockingly, they're like this big before you get to the tail. They're really big animals, and so they're really big rodents. So they're something that when you see one in person, my reaction is like, what the, oh, you know, and then they have that tail slapping thing when they're scared, which will just scare the crap out of you. When they get scared and they're about to dive, they slap their tail really hard in the water and they dive. So again, it's like a shock to hear that, and so it can be a little bit of an alarming experience, but sort of fun urban thing and not something a lot of us expect to see in the city of Philadelphia.
How often can you see one in the wild?
You spend more time out here than I do. I don't.
You mean out here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen them that much this season, but last year they were pretty active just about every time. You'd see either fresh stumps with fresh wood shavings all over the ground, or you'd see them swimming in the creek. We have some photos of them climbing up there's a stormwater outfall just up across the bank here. And I've been in the creek in waders when we were doing the freshwater mussel work here and had one swim past me.
The freshwater mussel stuff is a fun story. I'll talk about it generally, and then you talk about the effort.
Yeah. You want to move closer to the bank?
Yeah, cool. Let's go.
If you didn't get a look, there's the beaver stump here on the
All chewed down.
elderberry. One of the interesting things too is that what's happening is you have a lot of regrowth. This is called coppicing, when you cut the main growth and it resprouts.
So what happened to the tree?
So the tree was dropped, and they have been dragging them, and I haven't been able to find. I don't see like a pile of trees anywhere.
Yeah.
They drag them.
We'll drag them into the water.
Yeah.
We'll keep them in the water and then eat them from the water.
Yeah.
Where are you seeing the swallows? Oh, right there. Yeah.
And then there's a rock dove. We'll take on the way down.
We've got a rock dove.
Yeah. Just sitting there.
Where?
These guys are fishing for fish, though, right? Aren't they?
Oh, literally on the rock. Yeah. All right. So, as we pointed out, we've got some tree swallows dipping around, catching bugs over the water.
Rock dove.
We have a rock dove, aka just pigeon,
One's the only.
and I'll talk about the rock doves. All right. So we'll start with the rock doves. Although we're in more of a natural setting, you think of the rock doves or pigeons when you see them in Center City or just anywhere, in parks, eating crumbs. They're another non-native species. We probably brought them to the Americas. Oh, there's a bunch right there. First is food. Has anybody eaten squab before? Yeah. Okay, so squab it used to just be one of the like eating chicken, I guess, but it's now more high-end kind of food item. It's an immature pigeon, so it's like before they fledge, then you eat them. And so the old way of keeping pigeons was in something called a dove cote, like a special little building with sort of ledges or little alcoves in the side, pigeonholes you might say. And they would nest there, and then you would grab one of the offspring before they fledge, and that's dinner. And so they've been domesticated for thousands of years. Probably brought them over as food, but then people also brought them over for competitive flying and breeding them for fancy feathering and stuff. So just another one of these sort of very dominant urban birds that was very much an intentional thing. I guess if you could find them wild, that would be on sort of rocky cliff kind of settings. So they adapt very well to cities, because what is a downtown of a city but a whole bunch of cliffs? To a rock dove, and they eat birds. They eat like grass seed and that kind of stuff. And so again, you can find plenty of probably seeds, but you can also have people like feeding them processed grass seed, which is bread, right? So they do very well in cities. Were you about to point out?
Oh, there's a northern. I think the northern. There might be. I saw a rough-winged swallow go into that hole.
Yeah. A rough-winged swallow going into the hole.
Yeah. And there's a big hole and then there's a smaller one. And I saw the rough-wing go in and come out.
Neat.
I think
Okay.
they might have a nest.
You might have a nest in there.
We sometimes have phoebes hanging out on the bridge too. It's a flycatcher that likes to nest. Particularly, they seem to really like bridges.
And we're mentioning a bunch of species that love to nest or hang around human structures.
I saw the wax one.
So we're going to talk quick about mussels. If we think of mussels, usually you think of the marine mussels, or the ones that live in sort of estuary areas, the saltwater ones that you eat. There are also a whole lot of species of freshwater mussels. If you are thinking of like what is a biodiversity strong point for the United States, one of those is mussels. Salamanders, I think of, crayfish, mussels, all little things that you don't think about. But freshwater mussels, the ones we have get to be about like yay big, look a lot like a craggier, sort of rougher version of the mussels that you might get at a restaurant. They live for a really long time, what, 70, 80 years, Gesundheit, maybe longer. And in the ocean, you know, when you think of an animal that doesn't move at all, it has to stay put. In the ocean, you know, they'll breed, the larvae will come out free swimming and then settle down on some rock somewhere and then become a filter feeding organism that doesn't move at all the rest of its life. Then the challenge, though, with running water is how do the larvae get upstream? So if you're like something that's like a speck of dust, how do you fight the current? And the answer is you don't. You hitch a ride on a fish. And so the basic breeding strategy, if you call it a strategy of mussels, of freshwater mussels, is to hitch a ride on the gills of the fish, and then drop off when that fish swims further upstream. So then, when it comes to conservation, you can imagine water quality matters to them, but the other thing is dams. So a lot of the waterways in eastern North America, not just like really big dams like we think of like for hydropower or something like that, but little dams. I mean, this counts as a little kind of a dam right there. I mean, there are a lot of old dams that were for mills that are no longer there anymore, and so you have a whole lot of dams that keep fish that would migrate that would go from the ocean to breed in freshwater. They can't make it upstream, and so the mussels are also limited from being able to repopulate upper reaches of waterways. So there's a really active effort led by the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary of cataloging where rare species of mussels are in our area, and then sort of planting them upstream to sort of get them going again. These ones in particular, Robin was telling me, hitch a ride on eels, American eels, which have sort of a reverse breeding strategy compared to like shad or herring or salmon people are familiar with. American eels live their adult lives usually, some of them live in estuary areas, but a lot of them in streams, right? And then they leave and go to breed in the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic. So, and then somehow, and this is the really fun part, their babies then find their way back up into streams. And so it's one thing if you're like, you start off as a baby, little larval fish, make it out of the stream, and then remember where you were before, right? It's another thing if you never were there in the first place. So it's one of the more amazing animal migrations on Earth.
And how big is the American eel? So they can be swimming.
You can get them as thick as your wrist, and we've had some seen all the way up into the headwaters of the creek.
And the eels are, I mean, these mussels then have it like, because eels can like crawl up onto land a little bit when it's wet and get around barriers.
There's a small dam, like an old mill dam. They can behave pretty snake-like and come out and get around that stuff. Well, so one of the things that with the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary that we got to do was try planting a few of these freshwater mussels, the Elliptio complanata, which is it's about 3-4 inches at adult size. We basically planted them like tulip bulbs into the bank. You leave them a little exposed, and they do the rest, kind of secure themselves in. You tuck them in, and you see them kind of wriggle down. It may take a while for them to get secured, but the freshwater mussels are really great for streams because they are filter feeders. And some of these species can clean something like 50 gallons of water a day that passes through them. And they're just trying to eat, but they're actually at the same time picking up sediment and other stuff that's going through the creek. So when you have mussels, you can tend to have cleaner creeks. They were testing this area as maybe a trial site to see, for one thing, they had us looking to see if there were any established mussels to begin with. we weren't able to find any. Then what they did, they transplanted about 25 here and 25 at another spot downstream to see if they could thrive, and maybe that would be like the canary in the coal mine. Could you have a population and play around with reintroducing them here? Every mussel that was planted, we actually got to help epoxy a little transmitter onto a little chip, basically. So their researchers would come back out, and with essentially what's a metal detector, they could come back and ping these things and find them and determine if they were still there. Maybe they'd moved and washed out a little bit. One of the challenges that our creek faces is that we're in a combined sewer overflow area. So when we have big storms, the water that hits the streets flows into the same pipes that our toilets and home drains flush into. The way that it's designed has it that if it's a big enough storm, those pipes can fill to capacity, and if there weren't some kind of overflow, it would max out the treatment plant at the end of the line. So to prevent that from happening, there's a built-in overflow system where sometimes we have these discharges during heavy rains, and we have water come roaring out of what's right behind this tree, one of these combined sewer outfalls right in front of the. So basically, when these things are going during a big storm, because they're catching so much water off the pavement, we get a lot of water at very high velocities getting blasted out here. So this creek can rise very quickly in a matter of hours during a storm. So the question with the mussels is, are they able to hold on and anchor themselves in the sediment and not get blown away? When they came back a few months after we first put them out there, we had about 79% retention.
Nice.
They haven't been out recently to determine if anything's still there. So we'll have to find out, if stuff is still hanging around.
So these guys could live 70 or 80 years though.
It's a bit, their whole life is sitting there, and they can do that. I mean, there's
A
ways
long
to tell
time.
how long they are.
And in case you have any ideas, they apparently don't taste very good. And you don't want to eat a filter feeder that's been filtering this water for 70 years.
Yeah.
Along with the just the physical force of the water, when you have you have a lot of water running off at impervious surfaces, you get all the pollutants that are on those surfaces. So if that's old, like oil from people changing their oil or whatever else is on the street gets washed in. Also, you have a big temperature flux. So especially if it's a warm day out, all of a sudden the water gets a lot warmer. And so the temperature might be a problem in and of itself, but also warmer water holds less oxygen. And so when you have a lot of rain on a warm day, and especially with smaller waterways, the pollution, but also the temperature will pop up and the oxygen levels will crash. And so there are a lot of species of fish, invertebrates, salamanders, you name it, that can't take that combination of insults. And so so you'll see sort of declining diversity in streams as the watershed around them gets more impervious. And so I'm using this as a hook to Green City Clean Water. So that the EPA doesn't like it when we have when we discharge raw sewage into the rivers. Go figure.
Yeah.
So the city, 3 or 4 years ago, struck a deal so that to give us time before we have to rip out every sewer line in the city and replace them. Why don't we try making the city more permeable? So you'll see a rain garden we're going to see later on. You see efforts to get people to put in rain barrels, to do these bump outs along streets to catch more water before it flows out. And all that is, it's a good thing to do for the waterways and the animals and everything else. It's also something good for the EPA to try to forestall stronger action that would be really expensive for the city.
The idea is the more water that we can intercept at the street level and get into the ground or into these gardens, that's more water that we're able to keep from overflowing those pipes. We just rode up this little hill here. If you look back and look at it, this little hill is actually a buried pipe. It's a buried sewer pipe that we're standing on top of now.
Yeah.
When you come
Big
down
culvert.
here and look back, you'll see what this actually looks like here. So if you look back at this stormwater outfall, like we were saying, when you have these big storms, this water builds up in the pipes and comes flushing out of here. literally flushing, carrying with it whatever was flushed, and dumping out and just rocketing into the creek here. The water can crest up to, you can see behind the wall here, this kind of line where the stone is. The stone is like that because the currents up here are just pulling this away. This entire floodplain behind us is usually something like bottle swamp, because what happens is all the trash that's floating down the creek, we've got this big swirling eddy in here, and then when the waters recede, it drops all the bottles here. So once a month we have a crew from Power Corps come out and help us clean up at these outfalls.
Is there like some fruit and trees over
There's
there?
some mulberries in here, so the birds really love the mulberries. This is a spot here where it's one of the deepest spots along the park, along the creek, and it opens up. So this is a spot where we get a lot of turtles and frogs. It's one of the spots where people like to come and dump their pet turtles. So
Yeah, I'll mention that. So first I was trying to, I'd heard,
we can get a little
yeah, let's
closer
go for
to
then. When we were walking up, or I had heard a bullfrog, but I haven't heard it since we got closer. Oh yeah.
Little guy disappear in the woods.
So Robin just pointed out a turtle head, which we'll keep an eye out for another one. So we've got, I think Robin has seen, if I remember, you've seen snappers and red bellies. So we have a couple native species of turtles that you'll see in here. Snapping turtles, which,
I see a bullfrog.
where's the bullfrog?
So do you see that little stretch of land? It's
Yeah.
at the tip. There's a little oh, I see it. Point where it comes up. You see like that strip of land, like sand right there.
The
At
sandbar
end,
kind of thing?
There's a little.
Oh, yeah, I see
There's
it.
a bullfrog.
All right, so we have a good fix on a bullfrog, guys.
Elliot, kind of see
So do you want to take this? You want to take this?
So bullfrogs named because of their call,
Probably a little bit.
which sometimes gets written out.
Mine are pretty old.
It's always funny to see how people write out bird calls or frog calls, but juggarum. But it's sort of this deep. So if you hear it, let me see.
Here.
Thanks.
Here's the end of the sandbar. You see little outline. That's not. That's not.
Where is it?
No, you see the land, the
We got
strip
the
of
little
sand.
sandbar. Oh my, it's a big one.
That
Yeah.
is- I was
Yeah.
on the other side.
All right. So does anybody need to want to take a look at binoculars? We got a few floating around. Okay. So there's like a little, call it a sandbar or a silt bar, right there, and on the right side of it, there's a bullfrog sitting there. That is a decent sized frog. But we can see it with the naked eye right there. It just looks like a green bump where at the end of that little sandbar thingy. So bullfrogs, they'll take over a year to go from tadpole to adult size. They'll sort of they'll get laid as eggs in the summer, and then the tadpoles will make it through the winter, and then the next spring or summer, like, metamorphize, grow legs, and hop out of the water. On the turtle side of things, we've got snapping turtles, and which are, I think everybody knows what a snapping turtle looks like. Right. Okay. Robin got pictures of one probably coming up to lay eggs. What was it, just last week? And then occasionally they'll spot red belly turtles, which are protected in Pennsylvania, mainly because we're at the edge of the range. They're pretty common south of here, in New Jersey. And those look like, if you think of like a basic basking turtle, they're one of those. And if you have a question about it, the really big ones that look like they're kind of black, that can be a big female red-bellied turtle. But the turtles you see the most around Philadelphia are something called a red-eared slider. So if you think of the little green turtles that are sometimes sold as pets with a red stripe on the head, those are red-eared sliders. They start off like that big, and the females can get to be about that big. So a decent-sized turtle. If you go to Greensgrove Farm, actually, not too far from here, by Plants, whatever, they have like a big cattle tank or livestock tank filled with water, and they've got a few red-eared sliders in there. But really,
There's another bullfrog right
what
under
are you saying?
It's really good for eyes. Right there, you see, it's just the dark and the little.
Oh, you're right. He's right there. Good eye, man. Okay. Yeah, at the end of the stick right there. Very good shot. We have a bullfrog. Try to take a picture of that guy.
Where is he? Oh, I see. Oh, right on the wall.
The red-eared sliders, they're native to the middle part of the country, sort of the Mississippi watershed for the most part. And because they're commonly sold as pets and because they get way too big to keep in an aquarium, unless you have a massive aquarium, they tend to get dumped out into water. People are like, okay, it's too big to be a pet, I'll release it into the wild, which doesn't work so well. Probably most of them that get released die. So maybe, let's say 90% probably die because they don't know where to hibernate, they don't know where the food is. It might not actually be a perfect spot for turtles. But let's say 10%, 5% survive. There's still a lot of them getting dumped, but that's enough to have established breeding populations. So they're all over Philadelphia. I was looking into an area in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and they've got a problem with sort of exotic red-eared sliders pushing out the native sliders. They're sort of a problem species in Europe and East Asia. You go to San Francisco where they're nowhere near native out there, and you got them in Golden Gate Park. You just have red-eared sliders everywhere, and it's a bit of a mess.
Exotic, invasive.
All right, so I'll talk about two kinds of trees. I'll start off with the short part. That's a black locust right there. I like talking about them because they're one of my favorite trees. Why are they your favorite tree? Okay, so you can think of them as both a native and invasive species depending how you think about it. They're North American. They're native to the southern Appalachians, but they're a kind of tree that that the wood is incredibly useful. It's very, I mean, you like to carve wood. It's what is it? Pretty dense.
The thing with
It resists rot. Yeah.
They say it rots one day before stone.
So you can build fence. It used to be like really popular for fence posts. There's a spot in the Wissahickon where I remember floods like probably 8 years ago washed out some of the trail, and then someone took a downed black locust tree and they used it to rebuild the railings for like this steep section of trail. And they are totally exotic in Europe, but they're widespread. And so there's a whole in Europe they've gone way beyond us in this kind of study of post-human landscapes, of what you call ruderal, which means the study of ruins. So what kind of plants and animals inhabit ruins? And so post-World War II, in a lot of, like, let's say Berlin, for example, in a lot of the bombed-out areas, they'd had black locusts there before, but then they really sort of took over. And so in other parts of the world, in Europe, sort of post-war, sort of black locusts are sort of a post-war tree. And here, there's sort of a remnant of people planting them intentionally because they were useful for wood, and then sort of spreading out from there. And then right in front of us is do you know what kind of ash tree it is? I'm bad at telling them apart. Green or white?
It's probably green. Usually down by water is green.
Okay.
They're usually up and drier.
So this is a green ash tree. What kind of, was it a woodpecker hopping up? Well, we have fun birds too, but
there's a Baltimore Oriole nest that everybody can look at.
Where is the Baltimore Oriole nest?
So if you look down where I'm looking,
Which tree is it in?
you see that bird that just flew right out? That's a Baltimore Oriole.
There's an oriole coming out of a nest that's probably hanging where I can't see it.
No, if you come right here, so there's that. Is that the ash tree you're talking about?
Yeah, this ash tree right in front of us with the scar in it.
So all the drooping leaves, if you just scan the lower part of the branches, it's right there.
Okay, so I'll talk about the ash trees. Some of us will look at the orioles in the ash tree. But enjoy these trees while you can, because they're all about to die. So there's something called the emerald ash borer, which is a tiny beetle, like the size of a grain of rice, or a little bigger than that maybe, that I think is, I don't know, East Asian or European, I forget which. Asian? Okay. And they are sort of marching across the Great Lakes and the Northeast, assisted by people transporting firewood. So when you go to a park and they say, buy the firewood here, don't bring in your own firewood, that's why. It's because other kinds of beetles, but in particular these guys, will will have the larvae will be actually, or pupa will be underneath the bark, in what you might be thinking of burning for your firewood. And if you leave that sitting in the campsite afterwards and don't burn that chunk of wood, then that's going to infest that section of forest. And so that's how they've been jumping around the Northeast, and they kill like pretty much all of the ash trees they infest unless you treat them. But we in Philadelphia have tens of thousands of ash trees probably. You can't treat all of them. Hundreds of thousands of ash trees. And so the city has made an effort to cut down all of those that are near a building or a road or a path, because you don't want a whole lot of suddenly dead trees shedding big chunks of branches and falling over on people or on buildings. And then they've picked a few priority ones to actually try to treat. So if they got a really picturesque, beautiful ash tree, we'll try to preserve those, and maybe someday in the near future or mid-future, we'll have something that can kill off the borers, and we can bring back ash trees. And there's hope, that maybe they'll be able to release some parasite or predator someday of the parasitic species of the tree. So then that'll sort of control those and bring them under control so the trees can come back. But we don't have any solutions in our quiver right now that we can deploy. So it's sort of like, it's the city, and a lot of land managers and foresters have taken this attitude, which is, it's sort of like, it's all you can do really. But sort of like plan around the demise of the trees and see what you can do to hold on to a few of them. And I guess the purple box is a monitoring trap.
Yep.
So we don't.
Sticky box.
So we don't actually have the borers yet in Philadelphia. We expect them sometime soon, and we'll know that they're here when those kinds of traps come up with borers on them.
Yep. And if you look, there's like an ash branch, the lowest ash branch to the right with a whole bunch of ash samaras on it. If you look above that into the elm leaves just beyond it, that is the
Baltimore Oriole.
Yes, the Baltimore Oriole. That's what he found.
Nice eye. All right.
Baltimore Orioles really love trees over water, so this is perfect for them.
What do they eat?
They eat insects and fruit.
Okay.
Yeah.
They love these mulberries behind.
I was gonna say we got mulberries and we have insects, so just checking.
He's feeding a young or something.
Yeah, it's a young feeding young. It's a female feeding young in the nest.
Yeah, so we're gonna
So you said we might
we're gonna ride a little while now without much stopping and talking.
see one of those in a long.
We're just checking the time and how long we're taking.
I think I see the male.
Cool.
Over in that. A little.
Hi, podcast listeners. I had forgotten to hit record on a stop that we made along Lewis Street, just south of Richmond. We had come down Castor, cut over on Richmond to go around the sort of inland or north side of the Northeast Wastewater Treatment Facility, and then down Lewis alongside the treatment facility, along to the north of us, a railroad track embankment that is covered with a whole variety of exotic plants, bugwort, white campion, some ailanthus or tree of heaven popping up here and there, a whole mix of accidentally or intentionally imported plants, along with some natives. There are a few patches of common milkweed growing in there, for example. Earlier in the morning, before the ride started, Tony and I had flipped a brown snake, which I put in a jar and was able to show off for the riders who were with us, and then we released it where I found it. We also flipped a grove snail. This is a nice, boldly striped snail that is native to Europe and has some, very nice yellow and brown stripes. I had first seen one in Cincinnati when I was looking for Kirtland snakes in a vacant lot in Cincinnati. And then Tony commented that he used to see him in South Philly, but I haven't seen him many other places around Philadelphia, so it made for an interesting conversational topic. And then we rode down Lewis and over to the mouth of Frankfort Creek, where it dumps out into the Delaware River.
So this is the Frankfort Creek, the creek we've been following after it's changed names and become the Frankfort Creek. just as you come down closer and closer to the river, you have more little feeders kind of feeding into that creek. So it's the natural kind of way things kind of build. It's a dendritic pattern, a lot like a tree, where you've got these fine little branches of smaller creeks feeding the main trunk.
And most of those creeks are underground now.
Well, so this is considered a one tributary to the Delaware River. So we're a sub-watershed to the greater Delaware River watershed.
And this is where it's tidal.
This is where it's tidal up to Frankfurt Ave that we passed a few, maybe like a mile and a half back.
Yeah.
Frankfurt Ave.
All right.
So if you ever wanted to see the old remnant of creek, it's on the other side of Bridesburg. That's what's kind of the other boundary for Bridesburg, up by the Frankfurt Arsenal. That's where the mouth of the creek originally outlet.
Until they redug this channel.
So they dug this straight. And the idea was because the water was so polluted, everything was kind of shotgunned here after a rainstorm, so it flooded really bad, and the mills right along the creek would just constantly get flooded. So they just kind of kept coming to local government and saying, we got to do something about this, and they eventually decided, hey, we're just going to cut a straight shot to the river. And also, you know, that helps you get boats up to the Frankfurt Ave section.
Yep.
What's this building here? So W here, the water department treatment plant is right here. This is the city's big kind of municipal home base for a lot of stuff. So all of the stormwater pipes and everything that outlet, they're making their way to this treatment plant.
Where's the treatment plant?
The treatment plant are those ponds there. Those are part of the settling ponds for the treatment.
And we're going to see the other side of it in a minute. Yeah.
So there's midges that live here because the water's there's still some, like the breakdown of the bacteria breaking down the poop is causing some warmth, and some midges can live here year round. And they probably are. And so birds winter here that normally don't. Like there's like a couple hundred ruffing swallows that winter here. Occasionally some cave swallows will show up, and then there's often in the winter bird census just find like different warblers that should be much farther south.
I have found this one of the neatest urban wildlife stories we've got in Philadelphia. I mean, it's one thing where you have like robins or a bird like that expand its range a little bit to like follow bird feeders and whatnot. It seems like a different thing entirely when a bird would ordinarily be flying thousands of miles to Mexico and Central America and instead decides to stay the whole winter.
So from the wastewater treatment plant, we rode our bikes down along the Delaware River about a mile to the General Pulaski Park. And from General Pulaski Park, we were able to observe ospreys sitting on their nest on a light post at the edge of the river, and also a bald eagle flying by, which was then promptly harassed by a couple of red-tailed hawks.
There's the osprey sitting on the edge of the nest right there.
Well, the red tail's diving at the bald eagle. Looks like there's another out there too. So now the red tails are chasing the eagle off. You see just above the tree line.
Over there.
The red tails just sit that.
So in the gap of trees, you see some birds like flying around. It's two red tails trying to chase away the bald eagle.
We hope you enjoyed this special edition of the Urban Wildlife Podcast in the Field. Again, thanks to the Bikesploration people, that's Hidden City and Spoke Magazine. Many thanks to Robin Irisari, our podcast best friend in the whole world, for teaming up with us on this wonderful bike tour of the Tacony Creek and the urban Philadelphia beyond the creek. Again, if you do like the podcast, please leave us a rating and some comments on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or something else. Please also follow us on Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast. Follow us on Facebook. You can also drop us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. And of course, if you see something really cool, please record a little note about it on your phone and then email us the file, or you can give us a call at 267-603-3219. Again, 267-603-3219. Thanks.